Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. You're not going to want to miss this one. Today we're diving deep into the controversy surrounding President-elect Trump's pick for Attorney General.
Yeah, we're talking about Representative Matt Gaetz.
Oh.
Yeah, this is a big one. Now, this choice is causing some serious waves, even within the GOP. I mean, we're talking some Senate Republicans are flat out saying Gaetz won't get confirmed.
Wow.
So why out the drama?
Well, to help us unpack this whole thing, we've got our expert here with us today to give us the lowdown on what's going on and what it all means. So let's get right into it. I mean, it's not every day that you see this level of pushback against a presidential appointment, especially within their own party. What makes Gaetz such a controversial pick?
Well, a good place to start is that he's currently under investigation by the House Ethics Committee for some pretty serious allegations.
Okay.
We're talking about accusations of sexual misconduct, drug use, and accepting improper gifts.
Oh, wow.
You can see why that might raise some eyebrows for the position of Attorney General.
Yeah, the head of the Justice Department.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. That definitely makes sense. But even with these allegations swirling around him, Trump is standing by his pick. So what's the word on the street? What are Senate Republicans saying about all of this? Are they all on board?
Oh, absolutely not. The reaction from the GOP has been mixed, to say the least.
Okay.
There have been some very strong statements coming from some senators who wish to remain anonymous. One even said he will never get confirmed.
Wow.
Another one put it even more bluntly, just simply ain't gonna happen.
So it sounds like there's some serious resistance within the GOP. But is everyone against Gaetz? Are there any Republicans who are coming out in support of him?
Not really. I mean, the support for Gaetz has been pretty much non-existent, even among those who aren't publicly bashing him. Some senators are playing it safe, taking a more cautious approach. They're really emphasizing that the Senate's role is to advise and consent, which means they have a duty to really scrutinize the nomination and give their feedback to the president.
Right.
But even these senators aren't exactly jumping up and down for Gaetz. There's a lot of wait and see going on, but definitely no real excitement about this pick.
So it sounds like Gaetz's confirmation is far from a done deal. But let's play devil's advocate for a second. What happens if the Senate votes against him? Is that the end of the line? Or does Trump have any other cards up his sleeve?
Well, even if the Senate votes no, Trump still has a pretty powerful tool he can use, a recess appointment.
Okay.
Basically, this lets the president skip the whole Senate confirmation process and appoint someone to the position while Congress is on break.
A classic political power move. So theoretically, Trump could just install Gaetz as Attorney General even without the Senate's approval.
That's right. And this isn't just a hypothetical situation we're talking about here. Trump's already been putting pressure on Senate Republican leaders to give him the green light to make recess appointments. So it seems like he's definitely considering this as an option.
So the possibility of a recess appointment is definitely on the table. And if Trump were to go down that road, how long could Gaetz potentially serve as Attorney General?
Well, according to the Congressional Research Service, a recess appointment could last for almost 2 years. The appointment would be valid until the end of the next Senate session after the recess.
Wow, that's a pretty long time. We're talking about him potentially serving almost all of Trump's term without ever getting the Senate's stamp of approval. This is getting more and more interesting by the minute. But let's think about the bigger picture for a second. If Trump actually goes the recess appointment route, wouldn't that just pour gasoline on the fire? I mean, wouldn't that just further damage his relationship with the Senate?
It definitely could. Some might even argue that it completely undermines the Senate's constitutional role of advising and consenting. And it could set a dangerous precedent for future presidential appointments.
And that's just one piece of the puzzle. Remember, there's also the whole House ethics investigation into those serious allegations against Gaetz. So what happens to that investigation if he does become Attorney General, whether it's through Senate confirmation or a recess appointment?
That's a great question. The House Ethics Committee's authority is limited to members of Congress.
Okay.
So if Gaetz is no longer a representative, they don't have the power to investigate him anymore.
So that investigation would just disappear.
Exactly.
So basically, becoming Attorney General could be a way for Gaetz to escape further scrutiny from the House Ethics Committee.
It's definitely a possibility.
Wow. That adds a whole other layer of intrigue to this whole situation.
It does, and it raises some serious concerns about whether he would actually be held accountable for those very serious allegations.
You're right. That's a really important point to consider. So we've got this potential political showdown brewing between Trump and the Senate. And then there's this whole other layer of complexity with the ethics investigation. It seems like this appointment could have some pretty far-reaching consequences. So let's shift gears for a second and talk about the Department of Justice itself. What kind of impact could Gaetz's appointment have on the DOJ, both internally and in terms of how the public perceives it?
This appointment could have a huge impact on the Justice Department. We're talking about the top law enforcement official in the entire country, someone who's supposed to embody justice and impartiality. If that person is facing serious allegations and got the job through a controversial process like a recess appointment, it could really damage public trust in the DOJ.
That's a crucial point. For the justice system to work, people need to have faith in it. If they start questioning the motives and integrity of the Attorney General, it could have a ripple effect throughout the entire system.
Absolutely. And then there's the whole question of what Gaetz's priorities would be if he does become Attorney General. What kind of agenda would he pursue? Would he focus on issues that align with Trump's political goals, or would he try to maintain some level of independence?
Well, considering Gaetz has been a staunch ally of Trump throughout his career, it's pretty reasonable to assume that his loyalty to the president might influence his decisions as Attorney General.
That's a valid concern. And considering Gaetz was previously under investigation by the DOJ for those sex trafficking allegations, his appointment could raise questions about how similar cases would be handled under his leadership.
That's interesting.
Would he be willing to pursue those cases aggressively, or would there be a perceived conflict of interest?
That's a really good point. But didn't the DOJ already drop that investigation into Gaetz? If they cleared him of any wrongdoing, wouldn't that address some of those concerns?
Yes, the DOJ did drop the investigation last year. Gaetz's office announced that the DOJ had wrapped up their investigation and decided not to file any charges. But the fact that he was under investigation at all could still stick in people's minds.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Even if there was no wrongdoing, the perception of a potential conflict of interest could still hurt the reputation of the DOJ. And the timing of the investigation ending just before his potential appointment as Attorney General is definitely eyebrow-raising.
Exactly. That's not something you can just ignore. Even if everything was completely above board, the optics aren't good. It just feeds into that narrative of potential favoritism and makes it harder for people to trust that the DOJ is acting fairly and impartially.
So we've got this potential impact on public trust concerns about impartiality and questions about Gaetz's priorities and potential conflicts of interest. It feels like this nomination is opening a real Pandora's box.
It definitely has that potential. And it's all happening against this backdrop of intense political polarization and mistrust in government institutions. The stakes are incredibly high, and the outcome of this situation could have lasting consequences for the Justice Department and the country as a whole.
This is starting to feel like a real power struggle between the executive and legislative branches. On one hand, you have Trump asserting his authority to appoint whoever he wants. And on the other hand, you have the Senate pushing back, asserting their constitutional role in the confirmation process.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder of how crucial those checks and balances are in our system of government. It's not supposed to be easy for any one branch to have absolute power. These kinds of conflicts are designed to force compromise and ensure that decisions are made carefully and with input from multiple perspectives.
We also can't forget about that House ethics investigation. What's going to happen to that if Gaetz becomes Attorney General?
As we mentioned earlier, if he's no longer a member of Congress, the House Ethics Committee loses their jurisdiction. Basically, the investigation would just end.
So his appointment could shield him from any further scrutiny in that regard. It makes you wonder if that possibility is playing a role in Trump's thinking.
It's certainly a possibility, and it raises questions about whether those allegations will ever be fully addressed and whether justice will be served regardless of the outcome.
All right, so we've got a lot of moving parts here. The Senate confirmation process, the potential for a recess appointment, the ongoing House ethics investigation, and the broader implications for the Justice Department and public trust. It's a complicated situation that could easily become even messier. What are the key things we should be looking out for as this story develops? What are some potential scenarios that could play out?
Well, the first thing to watch is the Senate. Will they even agree to hold confirmation hearings for Gaetz? If they do, how are those hearings going to go? Will enough Republicans break ranks to block his confirmation? That's the first big hurdle.
Right. And if the Senate does reject him, is Trump going to try to force a recess appointment? If he does, how will the Senate react? How will the public react? Could it lead to legal challenges or even a constitutional crisis?
Those are all real possibilities. A recess appointment would definitely be seen as a provocative move and could make things even worse between the White House and the Senate. It could also spark legal battles over whether the appointment is legitimate. And if things really escalate, it could even trigger a constitutional crisis.
Wow, a constitutional crisis. That sounds pretty serious.
It is. But it's important to remember that's not the most likely outcome. More likely, there's going to be a lot of political maneuvering and negotiation. Both sides will be trying to flex their muscles and protect their interests. The outcome is still up in the air. And it's going to depend on a lot of factors, including public opinion, the political climate, and whether both sides are willing to compromise. It really does. And it raises questions about accountability. If those allegations are never really addressed, it could cast a shadow over his entire time as Attorney General, no matter whether he's actually guilty or not.
Yeah, and it's like this cloud hanging over him. It makes you wonder if that's part of the reason why Trump is so insistent on this appointment.
It's definitely a possibility.
Okay, so we've got this potential political showdown brewing between Trump and the Senate. And then we have this whole other issue with the ethics investigation. It seems like this appointment could have some major ripple effects. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the Department of Justice itself. What kind of impact could Gaetz being appointed have on the DOJ, both in terms of how it functions internally and how the public views it?
Well, this appointment could have a massive impact on the Justice Department. I mean, we're talking about the highest-ranking law enforcement official in the country here, someone who's supposed to be a symbol of justice and being impartial.
Okay.
If the person in that position is dealing with serious allegations and got the job through a controversial method, like a recess appointment, it could really erode public trust in the DOJ.
That's a really important point. People need to have confidence in the justice system for it to work properly. If they start to question the motives and integrity of the Attorney General, it could have a domino effect on the whole system.
Exactly. And then you have to think about what Gaetz's priorities would be if he does become Attorney General. What kind of agenda would he push? Would he focus on things that align with Trump's political goals, or would he try to be more independent?
Well, considering Gaetz has been a strong supporter of Trump throughout his career, it's reasonable to assume that his loyalty to the president could influence his actions as Attorney General.
That's a legitimate concern. And given that Gaetz himself was under investigation by the DOJ for those sex trafficking allegations, his appointment could raise questions about how similar cases would be handled if he's in charge.
That's a really interesting point.
Would he be willing to go after those cases aggressively, or would there be a perceived conflict of interest?
That's a really good point. But didn't the DOJ already drop that investigation into Gaetz? If they cleared him of any wrongdoing, wouldn't that put some of those concerns to rest?
Yeah, they did drop the investigation last year. Gaetz's office announced that the DOJ had finished their investigation and decided not to press charges. However, the fact that he's under investigation in the first place could still linger in people's minds.
Right. Even if he didn't do anything wrong, the perception of a potential conflict of interest could still damage the DOJ's reputation. And the fact that the investigation ended just before his potential appointment as Attorney General definitely raises some eyebrows.
Exactly. It's hard to ignore that. Even if everything was done by the book, the optics just aren't good. It feeds into that narrative of possible favoritism and makes it harder for people to believe that the DOJ is being fair and impartial.
So we have this potential impact on public trust, concerns about impartiality, and questions about Gaetz's priorities and potential conflicts of interest. It seems like this nomination is really stirring things up.
It definitely has the potential to. And it's all happening in this context of extreme political division and lack of trust in government institutions. The stakes are incredibly high, and what happens with this situation could have long-term consequences for the Justice Department and the country as a whole.
It feels like we're watching a power struggle unfold between the executive and legislative branches. On one side, you have Trump saying he has the authority to appoint whoever he wants. And on the other side, you have the Senate pushing back and saying they have a constitutional role in the confirmation process.
It is a power struggle, and it reminds us how important those checks and balances are in our system of government. No single branch is supposed to be able to have absolute power. These types of conflicts are designed to force compromise and make sure that decisions are made thoughtfully and with input from different perspectives.
And we can't forget about that House ethics investigation. What happens to that if Gaetz actually becomes Attorney General?
As we discussed before, he's not a member of Congress anymore. The House Ethics Committee loses their power to investigate him. The investigation would basically just stop.
So by being appointed, he could essentially avoid any further scrutiny from that investigation. It really makes you think about whether that's a factor in Trump's calculations.
It's definitely a possibility. And it raises questions about whether those allegations will ever be fully addressed and whether justice will be served regardless of what happens.
Okay, so there are a lot of things happening here. The Senate confirmation process, the possibility of a recess appointment, the ongoing House ethics investigation, and the broader implications for the Justice Department and public trust. This is a complex situation that could get even more complicated. So what should we be paying attention to as this story develops?
Right.
What are some possible scenarios that could play out?
Well, first and foremost, keep an eye on the Senate. Will they even hold hearings for Gaetz's confirmation? And if they do, how will those hearings go? Will enough Republicans go against their party to block his confirmation? That's the first big hurdle.
Right. And if the Senate does reject him, will Trump try to push through a recess appointment? And if he does, how will the Senate and the public react? Could it lead to legal challenges or even a constitutional crisis?
Those are all real possibilities. Using a recess appointment would definitely be seen as a provocative move and could escalate tensions between the White House and the Senate. It could also result in legal battles over whether the appointment is valid. And if things really get out of hand, it could even trigger a constitutional crisis.
Wow, a constitutional crisis. That's a pretty serious situation.
It is serious, but it's important to remember that that's not the most likely outcome. It's more probable that there will be a lot of political maneuvering and negotiations going on, with both sides trying to exert their influence and protect their own interests. The final result is still uncertain, and it will depend on a number of factors, including what the public thinks, the political atmosphere, and whether both sides are open to compromise.
This whole thing really highlights just how much power the president has when it comes to appointments, especially for a position as important as Attorney General.
Yeah, for sure. And it's important to remember that the Attorney General serves at the pleasure of the president.
Right.
Meaning that even if Gaetz gets confirmed by the Senate, Trump could still technically fire him at any time if he's not happy with his performance.
That's a lot of power to have over someone. And historically, we've seen presidents from both parties use that power. It shows that the Attorney General, while expected to uphold the law impartially, ultimately answers to the president.
Exactly. It adds another layer of complexity to this situation. We have to consider not just the potential conflicts of interest Gaetz might bring to the role, but also how his relationship with President Trump might affect his actions and decisions as Attorney General.
It makes you think about how this all fits into the bigger picture of Trump's second term. Could this be a taste of what's to come? Should we expect more controversial appointments and battles with Congress?
It's certainly possible. Trump has never been one to shy away from pushing boundaries and challenging the status quo. And with a more divided Congress than in his first term, we might very well see more gridlock and political maneuvering. This Gaetz nomination could be a preview of the types of fights we can expect in the next few years.
It definitely feels like we're moving into a period of greater political uncertainty and instability.
I think that's a fair assessment, and it really emphasizes the importance of staying informed and being engaged citizens. We need to pay attention to what's going on, understand what these political decisions mean, and make our voices heard.
Absolutely. And that's what we're all about here at The Deep Dive. We're at helping people understand complex issues and have meaningful discussions.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, and the more informed we are, the better equipped we are to participate in our democracy.
You're absolutely right. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about Gaetz's background, the controversies surrounding his nomination, the possibility of a recess appointment, the potential impact on the Justice Department, and the wider political context. What do you think is the most important takeaway for our listeners?
I think the key takeaway is that this story is far from over. There are still many unknowns, and the outcome could have a significant impact on the entire country. We need to stay informed, stay engaged, and hold our leaders accountable.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So that wraps up our deep dive into the Gaetz nomination. We'd love to hear what you think, so let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you think he should be confirmed? What are your predictions for how this will all unfold? We want to hear from you. And as always, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our future deep dives. Until next time, stay curious